You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Today on our Total Wellness Tuesday show, this is a show that I've been actually looking forward to bringing you for quite some time. And the reason is that at least I see in my practice, now maybe it's just my practice alone, but however, I like to look at my actual Boston practice and my online practice as well as like a microcosm for the greater macrocosm of, I don't even, macrocosm is the word, of the world. And the reason I say that is that we as humans all kind of suffer very, very much in the same way as each other, but we simply see it as our own issues that we have to deal with personally, meaning like there's not a lot of people maybe in our sphere, unless we're part of a support group, that suffer in the same exact way. So it makes us feel a lot of times like we're all alone. And the truth is that you're not. You know, a lot of people come into my practice and say, have you ever heard of this before? And I say, yes, 2 other times actually today. So, and they're always shocked about, you know, hearing that feedback from me. And I just want you to know that you really aren't alone with what you're feeling. And that's the good thing, because you know that if someone else is suffering from what you have right now and they're getting the answers, they're getting well, there's obviously hope for you. But one of the things that you need to do is that you need to fine tune it. Like, for example, I get a lot of people asking on the Cabral House calls on the weekends, you know, what do you think I should do about this, this, and this? And I'll tell you, I'm going to give you always my recommendations. And I'm going to try to do that at almost like low or no cost. Like, here's what you can do. Here's some nutrition. Here's what to look into. But And again, if you're just like, you're suffering just mildly from something, I think you can fix it without having to do anything very extensive. I really do. But if you've been dealing with something for quite some time, you're most likely going to want to run a lab test, which you can do right through us. And then you don't even have to do like pay for additional health consults because that comes with a lab test. Or you might actually then want to seek out a functional medicine doctor or a naturopathic doctor or, you know, someone in this field to help you with that as well, because some things go deep. And what I want to talk about today are 2 of those things that are very, very deep. One is adrenal fatigue and the other is hypothyroid. So think of adrenal fatigue as chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, immunodeficiency syndrome. So like any of the things that you would meet in the low category. And hypothyroid, same thing. Think of Hashimoto's or just think of hypothyroid. The people who get lab tested and their TSH is above a 3, they're not producing maybe enough T4, T3 if their doctor even runs it. Hard to believe that doctors are still not running a full thyroid panel with TPO, T3, verse T3, and regular T3 all by themselves. But they're not. For whatever reason, they sometimes decide not to. So here's what I want to do today. I want to give you the main difference between adrenal fatigue and everything under that umbrella. So remember, it has everything to do with all different types of brain fog and adrenal fatigue, as well as hypothyroidism, which is the low thyroid. So let's talk about that right now. So what I did was I'm going to wrap this up in kind of a summary at the end to just make sure that you can distinguish between the two. And I want to show you how also the adrenals affect the thyroid in a much more pronounced way than we ever thought. And I've talked about that on previous shows, so I'm not going to make it into a big part of it. But let's just go into some of the characteristics. So for adrenal fatigue, which is something, you know, I'm very familiar with myself since I had Addison's disease, which is the most severe form of chronic fatigue or adrenal fatigue. And Addison's disease is when your body is no longer producing cortisol at the same level that you need basically to survive, you know, for that get up and go. So I did a cortisone stim test, which is they inject essentially a certain hormone, I'm not going to go through the whole pathway right now, that would stimulate your hypothalamus pituitary gland to then tell your body to produce more cortisol. And if you don't actually produce cortisol when they give you this injection and they look at it every hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, then you're going to see that you are basically in a state of, it's called Addison's disease, where your body's not producing any cortisol, and you can see why that would greatly affect someone. But again, keep in mind, so they found out I had Addison's disease and they put me on Cortef and a lot of other drugs. And I did. I felt better, right? Because they put some Cortef, they put actual cortisol in my body. The long-term ramifications of taking cortisol is really bad, especially for your brain. So eventually I did come off because I started to study natural health, and I realized that even chronic fatigue, even adrenal fatigue, and I'm going to talk about even hypothyroid, are still symptoms. They're not the underlying root cause, but they certainly do need to be corrected. So let's get right into it. Adrenal fatigue is basically your body no longer wants to output the same amount of energy. What you're going to talk about cortisol and epinephrine, and sometimes you can produce enough adrenaline, but you can't produce enough cortisol, which just kind of leaves you stimulated, almost like, and I'll talk about one of those differences, like manic. So you literally feel hyper at some times, and then you just crash. So you get like 5 minutes, a half hour of energy, and then just boom, you crash, and you're even worse off than before because that adrenaline, you moves through the body can't keep up. And really, when you talk about adrenal fatigue or chronic fatigue, it's a nervous system based disorder. It is literally wiping out, burning out your nervous system, which means just think about like your nerves. When people say my nerves are shattered, I'm having a nervous breakdown, I've just broken down, they just have nothing left to give. I gave the example before, I would be so fatigued that literally I would not speak when I was just seated in like a group of people because the fatigue was so deep. I would actually have to start thinking about words to actually then form them into a sentence and then say them. And by the time I was ready to say them, the conversation had basically moved on. Like when you have to start thinking about your words before you speak, that's just deep-rooted fatigue. Also, when I used to walk, I would actually think about putting one foot in front of the other. Tell me the last time you walked where you actually think about moving your feet. That's the level of fatigue, like deep adrenal fatigue is. But remember, there are levels of that. I'm simply giving you a level of it. There are many different levels to adrenal fatigue, and it could be mild, it could be moderate, or it could be severe as well. So the difference with hypothyroid and fatigue is that there's usually no moments kind of mania, of kind of get up and go. You're usually just kind of low and flat all of the time. And that's interesting to look at. So that's one way to differentiate. Brain fog in adrenal fatigue is very pronounced, so it's just really cloudy thinking. I had to take my SATs in deep adrenal fatigue. Not a good time at all. And with hypothyroid, it's just kind of like, remember, hypothyroid, when your thyroid's low, it's lowered metabolism. Everything is just kind of slowed in hypothyroidism. So let's talk about the body next. When you are in adrenal fatigue, you could actually have a very difficult time losing weight, or you could have a very difficult time gaining weight, meaning like just so like my body type, even though I've put on more weight in the past as I was actually getting healthier, I wasn't expecting to be able to put on weight. But when I was in deep adrenal fatigue, my nervous system was just burning out so badly, it would be hard for me to keep any weight on. And that's one thing. But of course, when cortisol levels get high in susceptible people, their estrogen levels can rise and they can gain weight as well. Now, in low thyroid, you pretty much just gain weight. You have this lowered metabolism. Your body slows metabolism. You have to take in the short term less calories because your body is operating on a much slower metabolism. Keep in mind, with lower thyroid, it's doing that as a protective mechanism. It's doing that because it believes your body, again, has some reason to slow metabolism. Pregnancy, famine, war, drought, any of these things where body's like, whoa, we are in survival-based mode. We need to lower metabolism here. Keep in mind with low thyroid as well that you can get low thyroid from heavy metal toxicity. You could get low thyroid from a lack of iodine because you're also taking in fluoride, which I've talked about before. Fluoride and iodine, they're the same type of molecule. They're called a halogen, and fluoride could be uptaken by the thyroid cells, destroy your thyroid instead of the iodine, which nourishes the thyroid. It could be a lack of selenium. I mean, very few people, I run hair tissue mineral analysis all the time. Very few people have enough iodine in their body, or I should say selenium in their body as well in terms of minerals. So that shows up on both the hair tissue and the actual thyroid test we recommend as well. Another thing is the body. So the body of someone with low thyroid tends to get puffy. They tend to retain quite a bit of water, whereas someone with the adrenal fatigue can end up looking like almost like sunken eyes, almost sometimes gaunt cheeks. They can start to lose a good amount of muscle. Not a good thing at all. One other thing that's very notable, and they're even noting this in conventional medicine now as well, is the outer third of the eyebrow. So basically the part where your orbital, so the bone above the eye, that starts to hair on the very end of the eyebrow, as I'm like touching my eyebrow right now as I'm talking to you, that starts to go away. Like you actually just lose that hair. And that's pronounced in a lot of people with Hashimoto's and low thyroid. Not everyone, but enough so that even conventional medicine who would consider that, and they did woo-woo like a decade ago, no longer do. It's one of the tests. It's one of the things they look for. Very, very interesting as well. One big thing I do in my office too is I do what's called a orthostatic hypotension test. So I have someone sit on my exam table. I take their blood pressure seated. Then I have them lie down. I take their blood pressure. And then I have them stand up and I take their blood pressure a third time. If their blood pressure falls as they stand, then I know that's more likely to be adrenal-based fatigue. Now, they can have adrenal fatigue and low thyroid. That's absolutely possible. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But that's called orthostatic hypotension. That's an issue with your hormone pathways and a hormone called aldosterone. And aldosterone helps to regulate sodium and potassium in the body as well. So that's a really easy one. You can do that right at home. If I'm talking with someone over Skype, I can have them do their own orthostatic blood pressure test as well. Really, really simple. Another way is when you go from seated to standing or lying to standing, do you get a little lightheaded? Do you get a little dizzy? Do you see spots? When I was younger, even before this whole adrenal fatigue, like was really, again, they didn't know what adrenal fatigue was when I was 17. It was just kind of getting into the news. But I used to stand and I would get like lightheaded. I have to hold on to something for a moment. So you can see my body tended towards that just because of, again, you can change your personality, but my personality, kind of like who I was as a little human, was that, just fast drive, being the oldest child, being a, Vata Pitta body type, all of those things, that was the drive, and it was too much drive, and I wasn't eating good food. I was eating too much processed food, and that wore me out as well. Then I took thousands of antibiotics, legitimately thousands of antibiotics, and then that wiped me out. It's like, it's a very predictable, again, they call it pathophysiology. My prediction of getting sick was very clear if you had followed and seen the steps. However, that's not a conventional medicine standpoint. They don't see that. They deal with it when it becomes the disease, right? So once I finally had full-blown Addison's disease, they said, oh, okay, we have a drug for that, and it's called Cortef, and then they gave me another one. Instead of to lower my blood pressure, they actually gave me a medicine, a drug to raise my blood pressure, believe it or not, because my blood pressure was so low, I was just no energy. So again, there's no such thing as good, like as low blood pressure is a good thing, it's not. And there's no such thing as high blood pressure is a good thing, it's not. You want to be within certain parameters, 110 to 120 for your systolic, and then between 70 and 80 for your diastolic. You don't want to be below that. I mean, I had a diastolic, which is the bottom number, sometimes in the 50s. That's terrible. That's not very, very healthy at all. So another thing I want to talk about is sleep. Big thing with sleep. And then I'm going to wrap it up right now. So with adrenal fatigue, you can't sleep. That's the insane thing, is that I was an insomniac even though I was absolutely exhausted all day. So I couldn't exercise. I couldn't do anything. Yet when I would go to bed at night, my mind would still be racing, which is, again, one of the reasons why I got chronic fatigue Addison's in the first place. So it's a combination of things. It's never usually one thing, although you can typically always, as in always, tie it to a specific triggering event. However, it doesn't have to have one. It's just, that's what I see that over and over as I ask the right questions to people. But I couldn't fall asleep, and it would take me hours to fall asleep, to turn off that mind, or I wouldn't fall asleep at all. Now, in hypothyroid, you're typically going to fall asleep anywhere at any time, and you sleep pretty much fine, and it's hard for you to get up and get going. That's actually the same with adrenal fatigue as well, is eventually you fall asleep, and you can sleep great between like 4 and like 7 or 4 and 8, or just keep sleeping through the morning. That's usually good in the adrenal fatigue people. And then both people usually wake up groggy, and that's the tough thing as well. They wake up with that brain fog, and I didn't even feel normal until about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. And then I would finally feel like I was getting going. So that was kind of my broken circadian rhythm, and that's why it worked. So let me give you a quick recap right now. So the recap would be this. Again, these are all things I'm testing out that I'm hoping I bring you good value in that as well. One thing I should mention as well is that a lot of times in both of these low energy, low thyroid, is when you take your temperature, especially first thing in the morning, a lot of times it's in the 97s. It's 97.8 or below. If you just have a thermometer, very simple, you can take your temperature. again, lowered body temperature means lowered metabolic rate, lowered metabolism. It's not always just about burning body fat. It's actually your cellular metabolism, how your body functions. And I used to have 97.4 as a temperature, like really low temperature. And it was such a sign. It was just a dead giveaway that my metabolism, my whole body had just been kind of wiped out. And again, I wasn't gaining the weight. Like that's not part of it. It's about just a lowered metabolic rate. So let's see if we can just kind of do a real quick recap for you. I like to just kind of get things out, put things out there on the table, and then just make it simpler so you can start to look. Now, if you have adrenal fatigue, you're going to really, and I didn't mention this one, you're going to be more prone to, again, I did say this, the manic, the kind of very big highs and very big lows. Now, if you're low thyroid, more prone to just low, more depression, where adrenal fatigue, more anxiety and fear. And the thyroid, like I said, more depression, really low mood, apathy. Adrenal fatigue is also more prone to obsessive compulsive disorder. OCD is a real thing that there are many people who have to deal with, and it is because of wiped out neurotransmitters, GABA, serotonin. There's a lot that goes into this that people aren't talking about. And then also, with low thyroid, typically people have really poor circulation, cold hands and cold feet. Well, in adrenal fatigue, you don't always get the cold hands and cold feet. Sometimes you do because of that sympathetic nervous system drive, but it can switch back and forth. And people with adrenal fatigue, I find that they don't do well in either the hot or the cold, right? They can't do either temperature. They have to be right in the middle because they don't tolerate things very well if it's not right in the middle, if it's not cooling and calm. Now, with low thyroid, you do better in the heat. You can't deal that well with the cold in general because usually you're cold in general. And again, I talked about sleep, but I could go back and forth. Usually people wake up with adrenal fatigue between like 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. And low thyroid, you'll just sleep. You're usually a pretty good sleeper, but you still don't wake up with a lot of energy, and that's a big part of it. With in energy, neither camp has a lot of energy, but again, adrenal fatigue, they can push that norepinephrine, that cortisol, and they can get going for a little while, but then they just crash after that. And they also can get more lightheaded, more dizzy as well. Thyroid, low thyroid, you're going to be more prone to retaining water. So you're going to be a little puffier. Your eyes might be puffier. Your body might be puffier. You might just be more prone to, like I said, holding onto that water. And then a big thing with overall skin and adrenal fatigue, you're typically going to get more dry skin. You've really gone through a lot of your electrolytes. You've gone through a lot of your own natural sodium. And with thyroid, low thyroid, your skin could actually be dry or it could be oily. There's not a perfect scenario for that. So my last thing I would say is this, is that with low thyroid and adrenal fatigue, there's a big double whammy for low thyroid and Hashimoto's. A lot of times the way that you get low thyroid is actually you first start with adrenal fatigue. And the reason I say that is this, is that when your body starts, and I'm going to give you the 60-second rundown of biochemistry and how it affects your adrenals and thyroid. When your body becomes under stress, your hypothalamus, basically your brain, we won't get into the technical, your brain tells your adrenals to produce more adrenaline so you get ready for the fight. And then there's another feedback loop that tells the adrenal cortex to produce cortisol. And that basically, the cortisol gives you the energy, it constricts everything, you're ready to go, you're ready to fight, you're ready to run away, whatever it might be. And then the interesting thing is once you're in that mode, in susceptible people, it could basically shut down the thyroid from making TSH into T4. And then it can also change T3, glucocorticoid production, cortisol in normal speak, from producing, from basically T3 moving over to reverse T3, which is the inactive form of thyroid, which means that your TSH might even look normal, but you're not producing enough thyroid inside those red blood cells to get out of it what you do need. So that's the thing. Not everyone who goes, like when I went into deep chronic fatigue, I never got the low thyroid. My thyroid wasn't functioning as optimal as it should be, but I never went deep into that. Just wasn't for my body. You know, I got autoimmune based issues, rheumatoid arthritis, that type of stuff, stuff that we're not going to chat about right now, but I never went that way. That wasn't pre-programmed into my genes, my genetics. I didn't have the thyroid based issues, but it might be in yours. Now, I also want to say this. So adrenal fatigue doesn't automatically equal low thyroid, but low thyroid and Hashimoto's typically does be precipitated by the adrenal fatigue, the chronic fatigue. And what I would say is this, is that a lot of times both of these things in the grand scheme of things come from digestive-based disorders, where one of those stressors are actually food-based particles, pathogens, yeast, bacteria moving through that gut wall into the bloodstream and then either attaching itself to your actual thyroid or just turning on your immune system to such a heightened state that that can start to wear out your body or actually cause immune-based dysfunction. So there's probably way too much information for one podcast, but what I like to just show you is that all these books on adrenal fatigue and all these 1,000-word articles, they're not serving you, right? They're giving you a service, meaning like giving you a little bit of information. But do you see how deep this was? Like, this is not for just the casual article or the casual person to talk about. You need a deep understanding of this. And that's why I wanted to try to bring this to you today. If you'd like to just see for yourself, where am I at? And you want to look at both adrenals and thyroid. Actually, so again, I know this gets kind of a little complicated, but if you just go to stephencabral.com/store and you click under wellness, you're going to see a test that says thyroid test. That thyroid test actually looks at both your thyroid and it looks at your adrenals. Our weight loss maintenance test does that as well. Absolutely fantastic. So that lab, it's a little bit more expensive, but again, we're giving you this at our lab cost. You can't get it for less, and it comes with a consultation. The other part I would say is now, if it's too expensive, you might want to look at just doing a hair tissue mineral analysis where it shows you your level of stress and kind of burnout. That's $100, maybe $200 less. But all of these things come with, what I'm trying to say is a plan from me. You speak with my health coach, and you're going to get a lot of benefit from that. However, the reason why I do this podcast is so that you never need to run these labs and that you never have to do any of those things if you don't want to. I'm giving you a place to start. So what I'm saying is this: if you're looking at the low thyroid, I want you to also then look at, well, what would someone do if they have low thyroid that they would also do if they had adrenal fatigue? So the outward symptoms might be different. But what you can also do is, well, if your TSH is normal, your T4 is normal, all of those things are normal, and you've had that run by your PCP, look more towards adrenal fatigue. Look at that first. Look at the stress-based things, and then tune back into other podcasts. You're going to hear me talk about these same topics, but again, I know today went to about 20 minutes, but I'm going to try to keep it under that 20-minute mark so that you get a little bit of information every day. And that's why even if the headline of the podcast isn't directly, something that you might be interested in, I would check it out because, I'm talking about all sorts of different things through that specific time. And since I've been told I talk very quickly, I'm giving you a 40-minute podcast in 20 minutes time because I'm talking at twice the speed. So always feel free. You can rewind these. They're meant to be out there so that you can look at this data, that you can think about it, that you can listen to it again and take those steps that you need to start to get back your health. So really appreciate every single one of your listens. If you ever need a question answered, I'm there to answer your questions. Just feel free to write into us at stephencabral.com/ask Cabral. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. I look forward to speaking with you again tomorrow. Ever wonder what the best sauna, blue blockers, sleep trackers, wake lights, salt lamps, or other health gadgets are? Or what about the top non-toxic mattresses, sheets, soaps, bath products, toothpaste, and cookware? Or would you like to know the cleanest choices for hemp parts, meal delivery services, supplements, and much more? I personally curated, researched, and now created a resource page of all of my top picks that continues to grow each week. These are the exact products I use in my own life, with my family, in my private practice, and they're the ones I trust. To find out all of my up-to-date recommendations and all the details, simply head on over to stephencabral.com/resources.